Hey guys, you remember Next Fest? That thing that happened a month ago? Yeah, well, now I'm here with a perfectly on time and not late at all review of some of the hottest games at Next Fest, with a couple personal picks thrown in for myself. In all seriousness, I have had about 90% of this entire script written up and all the footage ready to go for ages, and I just couldn't get around to recording and editing as I had my PC packed up for a couple of weeks and followed that up with a week of the flu, so my dulcet tones were more like an industrial mining operation where you drill to the centre of the earth. The original intention with this video was to shine a spotlight on some games that really stood out to me as a part of the Next Fest that we had last month, and to hopefully drum up some interest as some of these make their way to release. Of course, in saying that, a lot of the games I played at the start of the Next Fest, and now as time has progressed, plenty of them aren't so underground anymore, and you've probably read countless articles and had several top 10 lists spammed to you on your YouTube, so take everything I say with a grain of salt because you've probably heard it all before. Full disclaimer here, I was fortunate enough to check this game out in person at PAX last year. It looked good then, if a little shaky around the edges. The build we have now does seem a whole lot more refined however, and a lot less of that early build wonkiness is present. The demo was still a work in progress, as I could kind of tell from little bits of pieces of missing text and spelling errors, but that's never going to be the end of the world. Beyond these stars is a colony sim where you expand outwards from a hub building that almost feels like a more chill cross between Anno or Frostpunk, and weirdly enough, a little bit of Timberborn is sprinkled in there. It's set on the back of a giant space whale, and it does try and make full use of this unique setting. There seems to be a bit of story, but with all colony sim games, it takes a back seat for your city building and planning. The game has you balancing between the needs of a growing settlement and the reliance upon pollution to ensure you can keep pace with those needs. All of this is tied together by a really intricate adjacency bonus system. This involves small things that make sense, like having farms next to water, but then it goes a step further with supply chains benefiting from being nearby to each other, houses near an entertainment area, and almost the inverse of that where you've got your wind turbines need to be clear of everything at once. So it was an interesting system, but a little bit heavy-handed for my taste. Unfortunately, I did kind of feel that I wasn't able to just chill out a bit, and I had a bit of FOMO on all these bonuses I was missing out on when I was trying to build an organic and natural city. Bearing that in mind, it does feel like it leans a little more on the side of a puzzle game rather than a traditional colony sim. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it was something sitting in the back of my mind as I progressed. Something that stood out to me about this game is the way that progression worked. You were able to move through the tech tree by producing the resources that directly feed into what that tech unlocked. It's weird how much sense this approach makes, and surprises me that more colony sims don't do this, as it lets you jump straight into the new stuff you've just gotten, rather than unlocking the tech and then grinding for hours to be able to use it, or just immediately surpassing that tech because it took too long to research and you've built up enough wealth. Something that kind of felt a bit off to me was the textures. They seem to be a little bit too messy, like a design language has yet to be finalised. The colonists are low poly people made up of a couple of shapes, which is fine, and the terrain is built in small hexes, again, which is fine. But then there were some aspects of the visuals that felt like they needed just a little bit more refining or becoming more conducive to what's around them. It's hard to put my finger on exactly, but things like the iron texture and the trees felt a little out of place for some reason. It is definitely one of these things that after you play for about 20 minutes you don't notice anymore, so it's not that big of a deal and I'm sure it'll get worked on in the future. Beyond These Stars is being developed by a studio across the pond in New Zealand, Balancing Monkey Games. I've wishlisted it, and I do recommend doing the same, as this was definitely one to keep an eye on. The game is planned to release sometime in 2024. In a sequel to an indie darling from 2018 by Contingent 99, Wizard of Legend 2 comes for us from developer Dead Mage, in cooperation with Contingent 99, and they return to the world in style. And by in style, I really mean that they've completely changed the original style that the game had. Wizard of Legend 2 is a roguelike game where you sling spells that you collect over time and fight foes in trials. As a part of the game loop, like most modern roguelikes, after falling in combat you get taken back to a hub area where you're able to invest your resources into more permanent buffs. Of interest, this game I believe will have 4-player co-op on release, which helps set it apart from other games in the similar sphere. It also has a bit of a cheeky vibe with tongue-in-cheek jokes either visually or through the voice actor characters. So far, none of it was really that cringe, and it didn't really overstay its welcome, so it's a good sign for me. In a strange way, it almost harkens back to the old Magicka days. I played a few runs, which you can probably guess because of how bad my gameplay has been up on the screen. Enough to get through and unlock all the interactive pieces in the hub world. You can check out different arcana, which are essentially your spells, with different tiers for your basic, signature and standard kits. There seems to be some other bits and pieces of customization sprinkled throughout, but it remains to be seen as you sort of work your way through the entire game. I have to say, I am quite a fan of the graphics and presentation in this game. They're flashy, but clearly demonstrate information you need to know. It was a lot of fun, and it really conveyed how powerful and punchy some of the spells you are using really feel, which I think is the most important part in any spellcasting game. The music was okay, but it could have elevated the moment sometimes, but again, it's early days and only fought a handful of bosses. I've wishlisted this game, and I reckon it's worth you checking out for yourself if you're into the roguelike kind of game. They've yet to announce a release date for this one, but I'll be keeping an eye out for it. Another colony settlement builder. What a shock, am I right? Well, to be honest, that's what the Steam tag has it set as, but I struggled to see the colony sim part of the game as I was playing it. In my experience, it felt more like a tower defense game. Not to say that's necessarily a bad thing, but the colony sim tag is what had originally intrigued me and got me into it in the first place. In this game, you play as a company in space that is responsible for drilling to the core of planets. Kind of says it on the tin, right? The premise does seem somewhat interesting, and it does that thing where it kind of establishes the gameplay loop that you'll be going through just from the premise itself. Which, honestly, it's an interesting tactic, as I feel that it can be very quickly and more easily hook people in through trailers or early impressions, rather than having to spend 40-50 minutes playing a game. The moment-to-moment gameplay of Drill Core breaks down the game into 2 phases. You start by taking your employees and getting them to dig up the earth below your drill in search of key resources and minerals. Each employee can only complete a certain task, so you need to manage your numbers carefully and what balance you want to reach. Also within this stage, you can build buildings that will support your workers and then also set up your turrets and defences along the walls of the cavern that you're digging through. The next stage of the game has you defending against a bunch of insectoid-looking aliens. The player agency in this stage is a bit limited, as your turrets will do their thing dependent on their placement. There are some active abilities, but in my limited experience and time with the game, it really just seemed to boil down to hitting a button after a cooldown finished. Following a successful defense phase, you rinse and repeat until you reach the core. I'll be honest, of the games on this list, this will unfortunately be the one I clicked with the least. Something about the gameplay loop felt a little too hands-off for me, and making mistakes with placement early on damages your chances of succeeding way later down the line. Whilst I acknowledge that this is a staple of the tower defense gameplay style, something about this game screams Steam Deck or mobile gaming. In a good way. It's not really going to be something that I spend my precious desk gaming time on. With all of that said, of this list that I'm putting together, I do think that this one will be the one that picks up the most steam, since it's just got that right kind of indie game vibe and gameplay loop that will take certain circles of the internet by storm. It is PC Gamer Indie Darling of the Year energy. Well, apart from the Latro, but good luck topping that one. I did enjoy it enough that I would be interested in exploring it at full release, once we have a bit more robust system in place and potentially a little bit more flexibility in what you can do early game, such that you're not hamstringing yourself later. There's no release date locked in yet, but it seems like it was decently along when I played, Keep an eye out for this game from Hungry Couch Games, and notably it's also been published by Tiny Build, which can be a stamp of quality. Caravan Sandwitch showed up on the Wholesome Direct as part of the Summer Games mess, and I knew instantly I was going to be keen on it. This game's from developer Plain Toast, spelt like this vehicle that soars through the skies, and the bread that comes out of your toaster. For those who have seen some of my other videos, you should know that this is right up my alley, as it feels very Sable-like. Right from loading up the game and sitting in the main menu with that soundtrack playing, I knew what I was in for, and I was really keen on it. The demo was relatively short, but it gave me the opportunity to wander around and test out some of the gameplay that was on offer. Seems like the gameplay loop consists of exploring the world on foot and in your truck, and scaling some of the ruins and terrain in order to collect loot and complete puzzles. This is accompanied by a fair bit of dialogue from supporting characters, who are all welcoming back the main character after they've spent some time away. The setting is that sort of lo-fi sci-fi, where advanced technology exists, but is also juxtapositioned by a lot of ruins and examples of humanity regressing, or potentially just refusing to progress and being left behind. The art direction kept things vibrant, so it wasn't like trudging through the world of Fallout or Stalker. It seems to have a bit of mystery dotted throughout the world diegetically, through the structures or the musings of characters, which I'm looking forward to unfolding when I get my hands on this game. There was that little bit of early dev jank that you generally always have to deal with in a 3D indie game, but I don't doubt that most of those minor annoyances with the controls and camera will be ironed out. Regardless of this, I do feel the nature of the game lends itself to a slower pace, so I would be surprised if you would ever get a game over and need to blame it on the controls. I had quite a bit of fun with this game, but the demo was a bit too short. I've still wishlisted it, but it remains to be seen how the game would hold up on a larger scale, but it kind of gives me the vibe that it will thrive in a cozy exploration kind of style. No set release date yet, just 2024 at this stage. And here we are with the last game of the video, and it's another colony sim. Bet you didn't see that one coming. Gonna be totally honest, this one is the one. If you wishlist at least one game from this video, make sure it's this one. I am hooked and am already chomping at the bit to play some more. It's a settlement management game set in the sky with a gorgeous art direction that is reminiscent of some cozy Studio Ghibli movies, or Death's Doors from The Gamers Among Us. I love the way everything looks like it's a big patchwork quilt, and how each city has its own little bit of personality, from the statues and the building design and the architecture. The soundtrack as well may already be one of the favourites I've heard from an indie game, with the light piano and other background instruments spelling out an experience that almost feels magical, whimsical, and perfectly suited with going through the sky. I do want to briefly shout out the writing. It's a lot of fun, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. It knows that it's just a bunch of birds talking, and they establish some very obvious carrier archetypes. It's fine. It's great, honestly. Whoever was in charge of the quote-unquote vibes of the game has struck gold here. I am completely sold on that part alone. What makes it even better is that the gameplay loop is actually quite interesting and in-depth. The game boils down to a couple of core mechanics that have various different impacts on how you progress. You have your standard three, which are your food, water, and fuel management. Then there is also the aspect of villager management. You get to make the choice between getting a villager to collect food, or would you rather crunch through the research team to get more efficient pickings? Or maybe in between, and have some more staying home to refine the materials to trade at the next settlement. And then the part that really sets this apart from some of the other games in this genre that I've played before, naturally the whole thing about the city needing to stay afloat. You need to make sure that you have enough thrust so you don't slow down and sink out the sky. And you do that by balancing where the thrust comes from to counteract the tilt. Essentially, if you favour one side more than the other when building up the city's going to tilt that way, and you need to counterbalance. Coupled with that is a lighting system that sets out a radius of people being able to avoid injuries by working in the dark. So careful city planning and management is recommended, but refreshingly not actually required. On the flip side, as I played through it, I was very haphazard with what I did and never felt like I suffered for it too much, as opposed to some other games on this list. It struck a good balance with allowing you to chill out and play, and also let the min-maxes thrive. And speaking of chill, I would absolutely pin this down as a nice and cozy game that you can play on a rainy Sunday afternoon and feel totally at peace. And there's just a little bit of combat looped in there as well, but it doesn't detract from the experience whatsoever. Airborne Empire comes out in early access in Q3 of 2024, and I really do recommend you wishlist this one. It was definitely my favourite of the bunch that I played. The developers, The Wandering Band, are cooking with this one. I really do appreciate everyone that has stuck through to the end of this video. Just a reminder to please make sure you wishlist these games, as it really does help the developers out, and will give them the opportunity to let Steam know that people are keen, and in turn they'll give them some more exposure. Did you find any other games that you really liked in Next Fest? Let me know, shout out. I am very keen to try out some new games, and you can probably get a good feel for my kind of taste from this video alone. If you're still around and like what I've done here, why not subscribe and stick around for more to come? I usually do some sort of combination of reviews, impressions, with the occasional essay sprinkled in, where I dive deeper into the intricacies of a game's design and intentions. And with that, have a great one and keep on gaming.